it is time for our final speaker, and woo! We've saved. Well, it's not. It wouldn't be fair to say we've saved the best to last, but clearly we can't say that. But we can say we've saved the best looking for last.
No, you can't say that either.
No? Rich has trumped him? Yeah. Okay, stand up, take your shirts off, let's see the abs. You and Rich. I won't win that comp. Creative director and founding partner of design studio Ranger & Fox, Brett is originally from Sydney and now based in Los Angeles. Ranger & Fox specialise in discovery, strategy and visual communication. Brett makes the big trip down under, courtesy of our gold sponsor Maxon. Thank you so much for bringing him out. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett.
Hey, first and foremost, James and Kim, thank you so much. You guys have been the biggest legends putting this together. Maxon for bringing me out here. It's just, it's so good to come back to Australia and be able to talk about my career. And a huge part of my career is using Cinema 4D. So, my name is Brett Morris. I'm a creative director of a brand new studio. And today's, and based in Los Angeles, called Ranger & Fox. And today's presentation is basically just a cross-section of my career, some of the things I've learned, and basically where we plan on going next. And so to start on a really high note, I'm going to show you possibly the best showreel ever made. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so glad I could show you that. And as you can tell by the choice typeface, it's not a current showreel. So basically that showreel basically represents my foundation as a motion designer. And it's pretty much the first 5 or 6 years of my career. And I just found that, it's kind of hard to look at after all these years, but during that time, it was a chance for me to kind of learn on the job, fail, and basically, start to build up my confidence as an artist. And so way back in 2004, I studied film at JMC Academy. And sorry, I'm battling a bit of a cold at the moment. And way back then, I started film, but I ended up working at a production company on the side called Interactive Originals. And Interactive Originals was coincidentally helmed by my uncle, Rod Morris. So there may have been a little bit of nepotism there getting the job, but I certainly had to earn my keep. And I was told at a very early stage that the better I was at After Effects and Cinema 4D, the more work I'd be able to get. So basically, I ended up leaving film school to work at Interactive Originals full time. I just loved the job, and I just found that working at a wide variety of jobs across film and commercial, I just got to kind of see the production world in a wider spectrum. But because I came from film, I was basically just known as the After Effects guy. So it wasn't until about 2006 that I discovered Motionographer. And so this is a screen grab from the Internet Archive machine, just to kind of give me a little bit of context of what I was drawn to back then. And so there was 2 things that really stood out to me about discovering Motionographer at the time. One, I actually found a title to give myself. This thing that I was doing for a living actually had a title, because up until then, I was just the After Effects guy. And the other thing was, if you look at the cream of the crop, which I wish they still had, you can see a lot of these studios that, most of them are still around. Back then, everything was based in Los Angeles, New York, and London. So at a very early age, I set these massive lofty goals to work in America or Europe and just work with big design studios. It was just coming from a small production company in Australia that, I always wanted to kind of do big things, and I basically just wanted to do whatever I could do to get there. So I had this mentality back then, and that was just to absorb anything I could possibly get my hands on. The internet back in 2006, in the mid-2000s, there wasn't a whole lot of tutorials or sort of like a wider community to share from and share and learn from as it is today. So I pretty much had to read the manual, scour forums, and there were a few tutorial series that are available back then, but it was kind of slim pickings. It was all just kind of learning on the job and figuring it all out. And it took some time before I felt comfortable and confident with calling myself a motion designer. I'd been doing about 5 years, and it was around the time that I put together that beautiful show reel that we just looked at that I saw this. So we all know John, and he was a big inspiration to me way back in the day. And so when I saw this tweet, I thought I'd throw a Hail Mary at it. I thought maybe I'd be able to work with John. Maybe I'll pass him in a hallway, who knows? But I ended up getting a job at Foxtel, and lucky for me, ended up sitting right next to him. So it's a pretty cool thing for me to be, working alongside John, and taking a full-time job at Foxtel kind of allowed me to focus on one discipline for the first time in my career. So up until that point, I'd been working in, like I said, film, commercial, a little bit of TV and live events, but it was a bit of a jack of all trades, a bit of a generalist on the productions spectrum. So at Foxtel box office, where we worked together, we were doing a lot of the same type of work. And so we were really focused on broadcast design. And working in these types of jobs, which were all basically just film campaigns, we had the occasional, summer campaign coming through, but it was mostly just bread and butter work of, film promotional trailers. So we're doing a lot of supers, a lot of pack shots, and we were repeating a lot of the tasks. A lot of this animation that you're seeing is based on a similar type of camera move or a similar type of type animation. And, obviously we would always explore and, try and push ourselves when we could, but, it was pretty much, same thing over and over again. So John and I had a really good working relationship, and we always kept a dialogue an open dialogue as to how we could make our job better, how we could be more efficient as artists, and basically take away all of the technical headaches and just focus on creative. And so that's where this idea of, turning some of these repeating sort of animation ideas, sort of turning them into a product, a set of tools that basically any artist, including us obviously, could work with. And so movie type ended up becoming camera rigs, type animation tools, lighting setups, as well as some environment assets. And little did I know that this way of thinking, this way of sort of taking all these grand ideas, this big ecosystem, and building sort of components that would all talk to each other while kind of being scalable and being able to kind of do things that you wouldn't actually be able to do by themselves, but at the same time boiling it down to a really simple, easy to use interface and workflow for an artist to pick up, was really pipeline insight. So this was my entry insight into what a pipeline looked like. And so during this time, obviously I was getting deeper and deeper into cinema, and design wise I was feeling okay, but I was really focusing on the technical side of cinema with this development cycle. And it really forced me to get comfortable with Espresso. It forced me to get under the hood and start thinking about order of operations and priorities and all the stuff that you basically don't see on the surface level. But it was a challenge, because it was all about pulling apart cinema, rebuilding it, and then presenting it in a really easy way that anyone could work with. So once we came out of that development cycle, I kind of felt supercharged. I felt like I had all these tools at my disposal that I was just willing to pour them into something. And Foxtel Box Office ended up rebranding themselves to Foxtel On Demand. And so when that transition happened, there was a really nice set of projects that we put our hands up to take on internally. And this was the first chance that I got to kind of put some of those technical skills into something that was also creatively satisfying as well. All right, thank you. Yeah. So around this time, which was probably about 2010, obviously I hadn't shown that earlier work that, obviously that amazing showreel that we saw at the beginning. But around this time I'd been at Foxtel for a couple of years, and I started to build up what I thought was an okay body of work. I started to see some sort of consistency to the visual aesthetics that I was going for. And it obviously helped that we worked for a single channel. So obviously a lot of the work was, same but different. But John was a big motivator to kind of get myself online and start to build up my online presence, because, you just never know who's going to see your work. And basically once I put that job up online, things started to happen, and kind of led me into the next chapter of my life. So unbeknown to me, Denny too, who used to write a blog called Art and Business of Motion, saw the branding and put it up on his site. And to me, I didn't think the work, any of this work that I was doing was good enough to go up there. But when I saw it, I was absolutely chuffed. And it really exposed the work to a far wider audience that I'd ever been, I never thought could possibly happen. And around the time, coming from Sydney, even though we were at Foxtel, I still wanted to be more engaged with the community. And what I would do was, any chance I'd get, anytime that there was a project that really impressed me, I'd always send a little note. And that was my way of kind of connecting with other artists around the world and just kind of get more of a sense of community. And so what we're looking at here is something that I also had to dig up in the Internet Archive machine. And this was a message to a designer called Billy Cummings. And at the time, he was, at the time I thought he was actually a designer at ESPN, because he had just worked on the WNBA package. So I sent him this note on his WordPress site, thinking that it was a private message through his contact form, and it ended up becoming a public comment. So I thought, no big deal. What's the worst that can happen? But I didn't know that Billy had actually started working at Capacity. So the studio had put two and two together, that I was the guy that had worked on the idents. And so putting the work up online, it gave me a chance to rewrite a new bio. And this was, it's obviously an interesting process to kind of start selling yourself and start to really put yourself out there. And Julia, my partner, is a writer, and she said that, hey, maybe at the end of your bio, you should tell people what your end goal is. So at least anyone that's coming to your site, they can kind of get a sense of, where you want to go. So when Capacity went to my site, ended up seeing that I wanted to work with them, I ended up getting this in the inbox. So it didn't take long for me to make that decision to say yes. So I ended up just jumping on a plane, heading over to Los Angeles, and couldn't be happier. I was at the studio for about 5 years, and that novelty never wore off. I was working in Los Angeles, working for this company that I greatly admired, and up until that point, I pretty much referenced a Capacity project in pretty much everything that I ever done. So I was already sort of like learning to be a designer via proxy their work. So going into the studio for the first time, I was shitting myself, obviously. And, working with a great group of designers that work at Capacity, it's just an amazing place to learn and grow as an artist. it's iron sharpening iron. Everyone's bringing something new to the table. There's always a constant discussion about what's working, what's not. And I think just being in that environment as an artist just really started to, throw some fuel on the fire and get me really charged up to feel better, to feel more confident in what I was able to do. And obviously working on really, cool projects with, really good brands is, the best place you could possibly do it. So what we're looking at here is just a selection of style frames and some production frames and lost pictures that were kind of produced over the years, just to give you kind of a cross-section of some of the stuff that we were doing there. Now, research and development to me is, I kind of think it's like 50-50. The creative side always wins. Nothing ever works unless there's good design, there's a good narrative. But so much of what I do enables the creative to be what it is. So I've always looked at research and development as something that, I take a lot of time and I'm always investigating, I'm always researching any sort of new tools or workflows to kind of experiment with and learn about, because, working at a studio like Capacity, there's just an array of jobs that come in. And so, when the right job comes in and they say, hey, we need to do X, well, hey, I've got 3 options that we can talk about. And, part of that job as well was facilitating the pipeline and the workflow management of all of these projects. So even though we're just looking at some render blasts and some behind the scenes stuff, I just wanted to kind of throw together a whole series of things just to give a small snapshot into some of the stuff that was being developed while we were there, just in, pre-production and production as well. And, I ended up leaving the company with the title technical director. And so that's where that title was really born out of. It was born out of the idea that I could see an idea from the very beginning and just basically facilitate any sort of tools or pipeline management that would basically allow any artist in the studio to work at any stage of the project and make sure that project gets delivered on time. And, obviously with room to keep enhancing. And, I loved getting all of the other artists up to date with what I was doing as well. So I'd always make a point of kind of explaining what was going on under the hood. And that way, their controls would be a much more simplified version of it. But at least we had a dialogue that wasn't so much as like a scratching ahead as to how this would happen. We could actually talk about why things were working the way they were technically and, to problem solve. Okay, so now is the time I'd like to introduce my now business partner, Steve Panicara. And a lot of the stuff that Mel was talking about this morning really spoke true to me, because Steve and I, and for context, was another designer at Capacity. And when I first moved out to America, him and I ended up sharing a house together and really became one of my best friends. And we were just on the same wavelengths, when it came to work and how we kind of, the language we spoke outside of the work. And so him and I always had these like grand ideas of things that we wanted to try in production. And, we never really got to fully explore them. You're working at another studio, so you're kind of working to their clients and their clients' briefs. But, we were so charged up that we just wanted to kind of throw everything that we had inside of us into a project. And so this project came along. I'll show it in a second, and it was the first time that Steve and I basically had a clear runway to throw everything that we ever wanted to do into a project. And this idea that 1 + 1 = 3 was kind of a mantra that we discovered afterwards, because we realized that a lot of the stuff that we could bring to the table as an individual, the end project was so much bigger than what we were able to bring to the table as an individual. And so this is where we kind of discovered that collaboration and that bond with this project. So we were obviously stoked with how that came out. I mean, we felt like we had accomplished something special, something that we didn't realize that we had inside of us. And, we really discovered a lot about how we worked together. And because it was such a special project, it was a tight turnaround, we were kind of on our own little island making it. We kind of discovered that when we came together during the design and concepting phase and sort of locked all that stuff in and then split out, I would go over to the 3D world and start figuring stuff out, and he'd be kind of taking that in and molding it with type and, going through that whole iteration of just feeding off each other. We ended up just getting so stoked through that process. And so, we walked out of that project just being, on top of the world, but, we wanted to recreate it. We wanted to look at it doing another project as a proof of concept just to see if the two of us were capable of doing that sort of work again. And so when NodeFest came up, we put our hands up, and this is the little project we did for that. Thank you. So things started to change really quickly for me after that project came out. So that came out about February of last year. And it was shortly after that Julia and myself found out that we were expecting our first child, who coincidentally was born around the same time of NodeFest last year, and it's his first birthday today. So I'm kind of the worst dad right now being here, but we're in Australia with the family, so it's all good. Around the time that we found out that we were expecting Leo, I started to kind of ask myself all these bigger picture questions, started to value my time, and it's been awesome to hear Gareth and everyone else kind of talk about that today. Having a kid obviously is very demanding, and the industry that we work in is also very demanding. So in the States, you get 2 weeks of vacation off a year, and that was a real big problem for me. So we kind of discussed it, and being two Australians living in Los Angeles without a support network, we thought if one of us had the ability to go freelance, maybe we should look into that. So I ended up switching my visas to a freelance visa, and that may have been the most stressful time of my life, leading up to the approval of that. But it was approved, thankfully, and Steve and I then started talking about the dream. So I went freelance for a very brief run. I ended up leaving around July, and we started talking, not right on July, but towards the end of that year, we started posing all these questions about what would this dream studio look like. We'd always had these desires creatively to do the type of work that we were doing. We just never really thought about it in a business sense. So it kind of felt like we talked about everything. We kind of exhausted every option, and we started to build up the confidence that, maybe we could do this. Maybe this is something that is a really tangible thing. But Steve was still at capacity, so we were just kind of, just letting it boil in the background. But when he was ready to resign, we officially had a business. And our business is called Ranger and Fox. We were officially incorporated March 1st of this year. And it's been an interesting process. We haven't even been operating for a year, but I feel like we've kind of learned so much in this first year that, it feels like I've probably aged 10 years. But the first thing we had to kind of figure out was the name. So the name Ranger and Fox really came from a process of elimination because, I'd like to say that was something more glamorous to it, but it's almost impossible to find a domain name that has a free or an available legal name as well as social handles. And so we kind of debated, do we go with like a funny tech startup type of name? But we kind of wanted to build something that had more of an idea around it. And so the combination of ideas is kind of where we went down, and Ranger and Fox really started to, it kind of sung to us. It kind of embodied characteristics that we could apply to our design values, and that is protector of brand, agile in nature. So as we got set up, the first thing we wanted to do was run to the hills and tell everyone that we had a brand new business and we were operating and start hustling for client work. But we actually wanted to take a step back and start to kind of get the house in order. And we spent a little bit of time just looking at, the branding, making sure our proposals and pitch decks and everything looked fine. We wanted to get our messaging and positioning feeling right. And then we also wanted to take a lot of the peripheral responsibilities off our plate. And so, hiring a legal team, our business manager came on board. We've got an IT team as well. We just wanted to basically spend more time in the box, more time creating, and not have to worry about all that stuff that's on the peripheral all the time. So thankfully, we kind of got that stuff up and running pretty quickly because we started talking to Microsoft. And at the time, we were a 2-man operation just working on some computers in my spare bedroom. And if Microsoft had known that, I don't think they'd want to continue talking to us, but we were able to present to them what looked like a business because we were all buttoned up. So Steve and I have basically done everything together ourselves up until this point. And we kind of use this idea that, we're nimble, that can scale. And, because we've done so many projects at capacity and the 2 projects we were looking at by ourselves, we kind of, originally had these grandeur ideas of building a big, massive studio. And when Gareth was telling that the LA studio has 75 people in Buck, I mean, that just makes me sweat thinking about that overhead. So I think we kind of wanted to keep it small, keep it really lean, and that gives us the ability to be flexible with the type of projects that we take on. And, our overhead is so low that, maybe we can go a little bit of time without client work, and that gives us more time to focus on our internal work as we build up our profile. So in early July, we moved into our big boy studio, and this is an old textile building that's been converted into creative lofts in the arts district of downtown Los Angeles. We just were fortunate enough that we've been so busy that we couldn't do anything with it, but we felt, hey, if we moved into a space like this, that the open walls, the ground, the open rafters and all that, at least it's passable if a client wants to stop by. And we've actually just started a remodel. We started working with some landscape architects to kind of add a little bit of green in there. And it's in process at the moment. I've seen some photos. It looks really good, but I'll follow up online and share some of them when it's all better. But we're definitely keeping to the kind of nature vibe, and it's like a jungle in there now. So this year's been a huge learning curve for me. Every milestone in my career, I've always felt like, I'm out of my depth. I have to kind of learn everything just to be able to kind of stay afloat. And this year's definitely been a big challenge because considering things like the sales cycle and client services and just basically operating a business has all been very new to us. But I kind of look at everything that I've talked about today, my whole career, as basically the first baby step of many in front of us as we learn to walk. And I hope we're still around for many years to come. And so it's a really exciting time for us and for me. And so when James gave me the invitation to come and speak today, I thought I wanted to share my story. So as I wrap up, I want to really end on a high note this time. And so I'm really stoked to be able to share our first show reel. And so this is going to comprise of basically our work that we own, all the stuff that we've done this year, and we're just so incredibly proud to show this. We wanted to make sure that this was ready for Node. So again, I want to just say thanks to James and Kim and Maxon for putting all this on, and all of these fine presenters in front of me here. Thank you.